Good afternoon, everyone. You should have had some time to work on your homework assignment number 25 on Pythagorean theorem, reviewing what we did yesterday. Remember, if you're not quite finished with it yet, just set it aside and you can finish it up at the end of the period when there's that work period at the end. Just make sure that it's handed in by the end of the period. So everyone should have their handout of today's lesson on trig ratios. The first thing that we're going to look at is the definition of the different sides that we can put, the different labels on the sides of a triangle that we can put relative to a particular angle. So the labels on the sides of these triangles change based on which angle we're referring to. So right now in this first one, we're going to look at this angle here, which is labeled as x. So in terms of this angle here, we're going to label the sides. We have three different options to choose from when labeling our sides. The first one is one that we already know from yesterday with using the Pythagorean theorem, is the hypotenuse. So remember from yesterday, we learned that the hypotenuse must always sit at the side that is the longest side, which is the side that's opposite from this 90-degree angle. So our 90-degree angle is here. So the side that's opposite to it is this side along here, and that's our hypotenuse. So we're going to throw that label on here as hypotenuse. So this side here is our hypotenuse. The other two labels that we have that we can put on the triangle is one is called the opposite and one is called the adjacent. So for the opposite, we look at which angle we're looking at, which is this angle here in this corner, and we go across and we see which side is opposite to that angle. So when we go across, this side right here of this triangle is opposite to that angle, so that side is labeled then opposite. So this side length is a side that's called opposite. Now our last one, which is alongside this side here, which is right beside the angle, that one's called adjacent. Now what adjacent means is adjacent means beside or alongside. Basically that just means that's the side that is alongside the angle or beside the angle. So it's touching one of the sides that makes up this angle. So that's the adjacent side. Now, when we look at this triangle over here, we're now considering this angle here, which is up in this top corner here. So our sides are going to change a little bit. The one piece that doesn't change is always the hypotenuse, because remember the hypotenuse is always the one that's across from this 90-degree angle and the one that's always the longest. So hypotenuse stays the same. It's in the same position. So it's still on this piece here. But now what's going to change is our opposite and our adjacent, because now our angle's up at this top piece here. So now when we go across and find the side that's opposite to that angle, it's now the one that's down here. This is the one that's opposite to the angle because it's across from this angle. And then the side that's alongside or beside this angle here, that's this tall one sitting up here, and that's now the adjacent. So the key piece of this is that opposite and adjacent, they switch depending on which angle we're considering. When the angle's down here, our opposite is up here and our adjacent's down here. When our angle's in this top corner, then our opposite is down here and our adjacent is up here. So that changes depending on where that angle sits. So we're going to take a look at the first example. In this first example, we're going to identify the hypotenuse in our triangle. We're going to identify which side is opposite and which side is adjacent, depending on the indicated angle. And in that case, that's just the angle that has the x sitting in that corner of that triangle. So let's do that first in this triangle here. We need to label our hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent. So the first thing is let's label our hypotenuse. Our hypotenuse is the longest side, which is the value of 2, and it's always the one that's across from that 90-degree angle. So this side is our hypotenuse here. And we can just use the short form HYP. That's the short form for hypotenuse, so we don't have to write out the whole word every single time. HYP for hypotenuse. The next one that we want to label is the opposite. So remember, opposite, we go from our angle here and we go across which side is opposite to our angle. That's this one over here. So this one is opposite. And again, we can use that short form, and our short form for opposite is just OPP. The last label is our adjacent. Remember, adjacent is always the one that's beside the angle. So the one down here. So the 1.7, that is our adjacent. And our short form for adjacent is the ADJ. So that was part A, is labeling this triangle. Part B is now that we need to write the ratio for each of these different ones. We have opposite over hypotenuse, adjacent over hypotenuse, and opposite over adjacent. So that's our part B. So let's start with our opposite over our hypotenuse. So we have opposite over hypotenuse. So what is the value for our opposite side? So I'm hoping that someone said opposite is the value of 1. So that throws, a 1 on top of our fraction here. And our hypotenuse, should see that our hypotenuse is the value of 2, so we throw a 2 here. Now it asks us to round to 2 decimal places, so you want to plug this into your calculator. So 1 divided by 2, when you plug that into your calculator, you get 0.5. So the ratio of opposite over hypotenuse gives us the value of 0.5. So our next one is adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent over hypotenuse, that's equal to, so what's the value of our adjacent side? I'm hoping that someone said 1.7, that's the value of our adjacent side. And then hypotenuse, again, we know is 2. Now this time, throw that into your calculator. 1.7 divided by 2. When you plug that in, you should get 0.85. Now our last ratio that we're asked to find is opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So can someone give us the value for the opposite? Hopefully someone said that's the value of 1. And our value for adjacent is 1.7. Again, throw that into your calculator, and we should get 0.588 when we round to 3 decimal places. So remember, this will actually give you more decimal places. Make sure you round it to those 3 decimal places, 0.588. So those are our 3 ratios. So these are, just box our answers here. These are our 3 answers of what they were looking for. These are 3 ratios here. So if people still need more time to write this down, just give the video a pause. I'm going to move on to the next example. So we have our next triangle here. So we're doing the exact same steps. We're looking for our labels. We want to label our hypotenuse, adjacent, and opposite. And then we're going to find those three ratios again. Okay, so our first one is to label our hypotenuse. So again, remember our hypotenuse is the one that is opposite to this 90-degree angle and the one that is the biggest side. So that's the 9.7. So we label that as our hypotenuse. Our next one is we want to look for opposite. So we look at this angle here. So this angle in this top corner, because that's the one that's indicated with the X. And we go across. And which one is across is this 8.5. So because it's across from the angle, that's our opposite, because it's opposite to our angle in that corner. And then we look at this side, which is alongside and beside this angle here. So that's our adjacent side. Now that we've labeled our hypotenuse, our opposite, and our adjacent from our angle, now we want to come up with our three different ratios. So our first one here is opposite over hypotenuse. So we have opposite over hypotenuse. And we want, so opposite is 8.5. So 8.5 over top of our hypotenuse, and our hypotenuse is 9.7. And remember, we want this in decimals, so we need to plug that into our calculator. 8.5 divided by 9.7. So when we plug that into our calculators, we get 0.876 with a bunch of other decimals. But remember, just round to 3 decimal places, so we end up with 0.876. Okay, so our next ratio that we want to find is adjacent over hypotenuse. So we have adjacent over hypotenuse. So our top value here needs to be adjacent. So our adjacent value, we look at our triangle, and our adjacent is 4.6. So what goes on top of the fraction? And our hypotenuse is 9.7. So it goes on the bottom of our fraction. And again, we're looking for the decimals, so you're plugging this into your calculator and trying to figure out what those values of those decimals are. So 4.6 divided by 9.7, and we get 0.474. And again, we're rounding to 3 decimal places, even though there's more in your calculator. Just keep the first 3 decimal places and make sure you remember your rounding rules. The last ratio that we need to find is opposite over adjacent. So our value for our opposite is the 8.5 down at the bottom. So we have 8.5, and it's divided by the adjacent. And we look back at our triangle, and our adjacent is the 4.6. So we have 8.5 divided by 4.6. And again, toss that into your calculator. And your calculator should get 1.848. And again, remember, we're only keeping 3 decimal places. So remember your rounding rules. This is actually 8478, but we only want 3 decimal places, so we have to round it up to 848. Okay, so we have our three different values for our ratio, so let's box our answers here. So our three final answers for each of our three ratios. So if anyone still needs more time to write this down, just give the video a pause. Our last example here is example number 2. It's doing the exact same things, but now there's two different triangles. So what I want you to do is I want you to try these yourself. Try the next two yourself. There's two triangles there. I want you to try it yourself. See if you can do it by yourself. Once you have given it a good attempt, and most students have gotten some answers for either one or both triangles, then the supply teacher, she'll quickly take it up. She has the answers on her sheet so she can help you out and go through the answers. She can also check to make sure that you got the right answer as well. So go through them, give them a try yourself. Once you give them a try, then you'll check to make sure your answers are correct. So at this point, you'll want to pause the video while the students try this question. And now, once everyone's completed those last two questions, here are the homework questions. You only have 4 homework questions. Any time that you have left in class, use that time wisely to get these homework questions at least started, maybe if not complete. And if you remember, if you haven't finished up that homework assignment from the beginning of class, make sure you finish that up and get that handed in. Hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.